I am stepping in today for Leanne Simpson, who is the sort of brains and coordinator behind this particular gathering. So it feels really good to be here and to share this space with our speaker, Dahti, who I will introduce momentarily. I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Kwanlundan First Nation and the Kwachan Council in Whitehorse, Yukon. I'd like to welcome you to this space and thank you for coming. It definitely is a busy time of year, so it feels good to know that some of you decided to take a little time and space for yourselves and to be here to support Dahti. At Dechinta, we are brought together by care for the land, each other, and our desire to revitalize and practice Indigenous ways of knowing and being. Dechinta is dedicated to creating a future of Indigenous cultural revitalization through a reconnection with the land. Through our programs, we strive to create Northern Indigenous communities that are radically self-determining, healthy, sustainable, and connected to Indigenous knowledges and practices. We aim to ensure that the education we offer is accessible to all community members, including parents, youth, women, Two-Spirit, trans, and queer people. We have a mandate to serve the needs of Northern Indigenous populations through education, research, and community programs. And we are mandated to deliver Indigenous-centered arts, culture, language, and educational programming in an innovative land-based environment. We have a commitment to build educational capacity and employment opportunities for students and youth in Northern Indigenous communities. And we aim to increase the accessibility of land-based programming for school-aged youth, young adults transitioning out of high school and into post-secondary employment, and their families. The Sekona Getso, or Women Are Strong speaker series is meant to spotlight and celebrate the incredible work of Northern Indigenous women as scholars, researchers, parents, artists, activists, and writers. In these pandemic times, it is also meant to be a space of respect and connection, of inspiration and affirmation in the North and beyond. I invite you to create a supportive, kind, and respectful environment for our speaker and for all of our participants. So this is a webinar, which means that you can ask questions. And actually, we were talking earlier with Dahti that she would like to have a bit more of an interactive engagement with you. So we'll be using the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. You can just type in questions on the side, and then I'll be able to see those, and so will Dahti, and we will address them throughout our hour together. Mary Rose Sundberg, founder of Łíídlįį Kũ in Dene, translated the name of the series for us, and I'm grateful to Maro for her support and for her audio clip, which helps me, a non-Łíídlįį speaker, to try and pronounce the name of the series. Masicho to Collective Broadcast. They're an artist-run collective specializing in live streaming and tech solutions for artist organizations and not-for-profits, and they're helping us with the tech side of things today. Sydney Krill made the fantastic posters and is helping facilitate, and we're honored that you are here able to join us today. As you heard in the opening, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website at a later date. Dahti Tsetso is the Deputy Director of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. She is Klícho Dene and played a leading role in the launch and operation of Dehcho K'éhodi. So Dahti, you're gonna have to correct me on all of this once I'm done, okay? Because yeah, my little Northern Tushone tongue is having trouble, or English-speaking tongue that dreams of being a Northern Tushone tongue is having trouble with some of the pronunciation. So it's a Stewardship and Guardians program and the establishments of Edéhzhíe, Dehcho Protected Areas and National Wildlife Area. Before joining ILI, that I can say, Dahti served as the Director of Lands and Resources for Dehcho First Nation in Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories. She worked collaboratively with the nation's 10-member communities to develop a Guardians program that approaches conservation from the Dene perspective. The Dehcho K'éhodi program is founded on honoring the Dene Laws, strengthening the Dene language, and fostering connections between elders and youth, and currently employs about 20 Guardians a year. In her role with the Dehcho First Nation, Dahti led a team that finalized negotiations to protect 14,200 square kilometers sweep of boreal forest, headwaters, lakes, and caribou grounds west of Yellowknife. In July 2018, the Dehcho Assembly passed a resolution to permanently protect these places that Dahti will name for us as Dehcho protected areas under Dehcho law. Then held a signing ceremony with the government of Canada to formalize an establishment agreement that would designate this very special area as a joint Dehcho protected area and wildlife area. So finally, Dahti graduated from the University of Alberta with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Conservation Sciences and a Bachelor of Arts in Native Studies. She also holds a Diploma in Indigenous Language Revitalization from the University of Victoria, and she lives in, is this Łíídlįį Kũ? Is that how I say that? No?
Łíídlįį Kũ.
Oh,
Fort Simpson.
Fort Simpson. I should have just gone with the English name, but with her husband and 3 children. And the title of her talk today is Asserting Indigenous Nationhood Through Conservation. So Masi, Dahti, I'll hand it over to you and welcome to the space.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and also for trying your hardest to say some of those unfamiliar words. I totally empathize what that feels like as a language learner myself. So that very special place that I helped play a role in finalizing is Edéhzhíe. It's a protected area that was identified by 4 of the Dehcho communities to protect. They referred to that area as like the breadbasket of the Dehcho because of the significance that area of land has, not just to the Dehcho region, but also to the Clincho region for harvesting, for source water, for all kinds of amazing reasons. So I'm hoping to just try and inspire a bit of a dialogue. So I'm really grateful for the folks who've joined, and I just want to encourage all of the participants to kind of engage in the discussion through the question and answer box, because what I kind of envisioned sharing today is a little bit of the story that I've been a part of through the work that I did with the Dehcho and that I'm now doing with the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, and just speak to some of the lessons I've learned along the way. So like as just a little bit on, I guess, on me a bit before I kind of launch into that. I always try and start in language to honor the lessons that I worked hard to learn. Dahti Tsetso suje, Łíídlįį Kũ Simo Gabriel Mackenzie Scott, Uje Gotse Seta Patrick Scott Uje, si Dehcho Nande Ko Zomba Ke Gotse. So my name is Dahti. My parents are Patrick and Gabriel. I live in the Dehcho region. I'm married into the Dehcho region. I'm a proud Dehcho resident, but I'm Clincho Dene. And so I've always felt so honored to have been part of this really important work in the Dehcho region, working alongside community leaders, elders, youth from that region to do some of this really important work. And so when Leanne reached out to ask me to be part of this speaker series, we kind of talked through a little bit what would be the focus of what I would speak to. And the focus of my work professionally has always been conservation. But as it's evolved over the years, it's been how can the lens of conservation lend itself to strengthening our expression of nationhood. And in the lessons that I've picked up along the way, those two things can be very interlinked because conservation is sort of just a byproduct of Indigenous governments asserting who they are as Indigenous governments, who we are as Indigenous peoples. And because the land is so central to who we are, to our very identity as Indigenous people, that often is the framework for which governments, Indigenous governments, make decisions by. So they use taking care of the land and our relationship to the land as sort of a guiding decision-making framework for all other decisions. And so as a result, you see Indigenous governments, particularly in the North, but really all across the world and definitely across Canada, leading the way in conservation initiatives. And the Dehcho region is a wonderful example of that. And so I wanted to sort of complement my storytelling with some pictures from work done through the years. And so if everyone doesn't mind bearing with me while I initiate some pictures. So this picture is sort of special to me personally, because this picture was from one of the sort of camps that I helped organize, that really helped solidify this vision of taking care of the land as a way to take care of our relationship to the land and assert governance over the land. So this picture was from 2015. It came after the heels of a series of workshops and meetings that I had been part of organizing regionally within the Dehcho to really talk about what it meant to take care of the land from a Dene perspective. And so the year prior, in the year 2014, we did a series of meetings where we organized regionally with communities. We invited guest speakers to come in and to share their experiences with us from other First Nations doing really amazing work. But this picture is special to me because this is like the start of really materializing what people were sharing into actions. And so we hosted this 10-day canoe trip journey with youth and elders, where we started to explore, how land-based programming can really lend itself to our goals in terms of taking care of land. And so for me, conservation is a really non-Dene way of saying taking care of the land. And so in Indigenous worldview, it hits different than it does in non-Indigenous ways. So it spurred all kinds of work to provide opportunities for youth from the region to get out on the land, to really solidify or give those opportunities to learn who they are as Dene people. Because if you are strong in who you are, then you become stronger as an individual, you become stronger as a community, you become stronger as a government. And in many ways, this type of work, when done through that lens, starts to really repair or heal some of the colonial trauma that our communities have all endured. It starts to reclaim, pieces that were attempted to take, that was attempted to be taken away from us historically, and it starts to claim it back. And so what we did, these are just some pictures of youth on the land from the programming over the years. But all of these sorts of programs, all of these sorts of initiatives, these land-based initiatives really stemmed from our communities coming together and saying, if we are going to take care of the land from a Dene perspective, then we need to honor our way of being. And in order to honor our way of being, we need to provide opportunities to assert Dene laws, Dene values, Dene principles, and sort of the foundation of the way that we approach this work. We need to strengthen our language in order to really get at the worldview of what it means to take care of land from a Dene perspective. The language and the land, the lessons that were imparted is the language and the land are interlinked. The language comes from the land. And so in order to really strengthen who we are, we need to strengthen our language. And there was a lot of discussion around how current and future generations, the language is at a critical point where it's at risk of further decline. And so if we were going to take care of the land, then we needed to take care of our relationship to the land, and we needed to take care of who we are as Dene people. And if we do all those things, then we also need to take care of our language. And so what became sort of the foundation of the way that decisions were made, according to the guidance of elders, leaders, and community members from the Dehcho region, was we need to put our Dene Laws, values and principles, our language, and the building opportunities for the transmission of knowledge between the generations at the very foundation of the way of which we approach taking care of land. And if we are going to do and lead conservation from a Dene perspective, that is our focus. We do it from that perspective. And if we do those things, then we start to assert who we are as a community. We start to assert who we are as a government through conservation. So over the years, I was so humbled to have been part of these sorts of discussions and to be at the helm of trying to organize our communities around that vision. And the result was leading programs that were an expression of this vision. And so we put a lot of effort into leading land-based programs that brought together youth and elders, that brought together opportunities to learn language, that brought together opportunities to complement it around things like, how does the land use plan like assert itself, and how do we learn about that? What do we think about that? So these sorts of initiatives became really important as that expression, and that's how we kind of started the discussion. But as the discussion evolved, we started to learn from other Indigenous communities, and that those lessons, the story sharing between our community and other communities are absolutely important in terms of growing the approaches that we were taking. We started to learn about how other Indigenous communities, guardians, as an additional assertion of that nationhood, as like the next step in that conversation, to have your own people out on the land, gathering information, informing your decision-making, kind of being representatives of your community and your government, to say, this is who we are. We are out here, we are taking care of land. And if you are going to do anything in our backyard, we need to be involved. And so as the conversation evolved, we started to think through, how can we learn from other communities and the success they've had in guardian programs, and how can we do that here in this region as well? And when we looked inwards, we realized that the formation or the basis of the skeleton of that program already actually exists through the community-based monitoring efforts that were already in place and had been in place for a long time. And it was really a matter of retelling our story in a more empowering way. And so no longer were our community-based monitors merely our monitors. They were now representatives or an extension of that vision as our guardians. And so in this picture, you see Steve and Joe LaCorn and Steve Vandal from Fort Providence. And they were community-based monitors under the banner of the Dehcho K'éhodi program for years, and they still are. And in this time frame here, we were starting to really retell our story and to say, you know, Joe and Steve, they're out on the land as our guardians now, and they would help. The Guardians program generally would help start supporting they were supporting our land-based program. So in this picture, you see these two guys sort of showing youth in a land-based program that we had organized, how they were monitoring the Horn River, how they were getting information and data around water quality indicators, around the health of the fish population there locally, because the community of Fort Providence had identified that river system as being important, that they had concerns about people coming in and overfishing the fish population there. They had all kinds of community generated concerns that then the monitoring program, our guardians, you know, educating our youth, getting them to go out there for a week and be part of a fish camp. All of that was in response to these community concerns. And so you can see in the storytelling how you start to link governance over the land through these sorts of initiatives. And it wasn't just happening in Providence, it was happening all across the region. So there was work being done at a community level, and then there was, I was in my role with the regional office, I was trying to complement and strengthen the work at the community level and support gaps. And so as the conversation evolved, as things evolved, we started to realize that there was quite a strong story here. And how could we take that story and continue to grow our program and continue to sort of grow these efforts in really meaningful ways. And like I said, in all of it ends up lending itself to an assertion of nationhood by communities when they take these approaches. So these are just, beautiful pictures from that time period when I was part of these programs, where we were getting guardians out, we were getting youth out on the land, we were getting them to play a role. This picture is from one of the camps we did in partnership with the Tsikidéhzhíe Jean-Marie River. They wanted to do place name mapping. So we had elders from the community come out, work with youth, identify important places and the stories behind those places, and share them out on the land with youth, and to document it through video, and to help sort of evolve a community-based project that they were gearing towards. And so when you take sort of the foundation of the vision that was expressed by the Dehcho region around Dehcho K'éhodi, so using our laws, values, principles, language, culture, way of life, and bringing youth and elders together, what you have that is your sort of your guiding principles or your guiding values, but then the way that you then express that vision can be very broad. And so these are all examples of an expression of that vision in working with communities on it. And then what's amazing is the more you do the work, the more of the story you're able to share with others, because part of the reality of these programs is they get strengthened with partnership. And so over the years, we started to hone the storytelling of the program in order to enable partnerships, because partnerships were necessary to grow these efforts, and are necessary to continue growing them. And so, developing that story and then finding ways to share it with others. So that way, if you were another level of government, or if you were industry, you could also start maybe seeing how you might relate to this story and how you might build partnerships within it. And again, that work then asserts nationhood from a community and regional perspective. And so, all of that work was stemming out of out of meetings just like this one. We would host, and the region still hosts annual Dehcho K'éhodi gathering sessions, where communities from across the region come together and they discuss what each community is doing, what the regional office is doing, and where they need to go. And these sorts of meetings are so important in terms of giving everyone a connection point, but also give feedback on when I was with the regional office, what I was doing and how I was doing it. And then we would invite others into these meetings. And that, like I said earlier, that was absolutely fundamental into learning. So in this picture, you see Miles Richardson. He's the former Haida president. He came in and shared about how the Haida asserted their nationhood. And his message to us, and it was really well received by our communities, was you need to be who you say you are. And I think at the time, our communities were feeling really just tired of constantly meeting about what they wanted, and they wanted to start doing what they wanted. And part of the problem in a lot of governance-based processes is there's lots of process. There's lots of process that takes a long time to work through. And what we started to realize is we needed to stop waiting and start implementing our vision on how to lead conservation from a Dene perspective. And in doing, you start building, and it's quite amazing. And so we also invited the Innu Nation to come into some of our meetings to explain about, how they have led and developed their Guardians program. We invited Łíídlįį Kũ to come in to one of our meetings, and they shared about their Rangers program and how they were using that to inform their Thai Dene dreams, hopes and dreams for the establishment of that protected area. What was so important about all of these exchanges between communities was it was like this nation to nation discussion about what is our nation doing and how are we doing it? What are our successes and what are our challenges? And in sharing that story, it was such a gift to learn from, because then we were able to kind of understand what some of our challenges were better and how we might find solutions to some of those challenges, but also what were some strengths that they were already leading in that maybe we hadn't thought of. And sometimes it was really simple. like the value and the power of a guardian uniform in creating identity, for example. You know, that was shared really clearly with us by some of these other communities that came in, that we have a Guardians program, but what really took it to the next level was creating a uniform and really sort of solidifying our identity around it. And then, you know, our people are not just out on the land, but they're out there in a visible, recognizable way. And the sense of pride that it generates to have a Guardian's uniform, to be a guardian on behalf of your community. These were the sorts of lessons that were shared. So as the story evolved over the years, and in the work that we did together as a region, eventually, like I said, partnership became important. We started to be able to tell a story where governments were considering, like, funders were considering, like, trying to figure out how they could support us. But we also worked as a region all together to bring this story to industry. And so in this picture, you see communities, 4 communities who were impacted by the pipeline replacement project that Enbridge needed to do. They needed to come and get new permits for that through the NEB and through the Mackenzie Valley Land and Water Board, and they had to have hearings to get their permits and licenses. And so what you're seeing in this picture is our communities coming to talk to these authorities, these regulatory authorities, and to say, if Enbridge needs to do this work, they need to work with us. We have our own Guardians program. We want our own people out there monitoring the pipeline, and Enbridge needs to support these approaches in order to get our support for these permits and licenses. And in the end, it took a lot of talking for everybody, I think, to eventually understand the needs, but eventually we got there by working together, and we were able to get a significant environmental agreement in place that enabled the training of Guardians to monitor the pipeline, and then to actually be deployed on behalf of our communities to then monitor the pipeline. So they went out and they did aquatics monitoring that was separate from what Enbridge was doing. They did wildlife monitoring, they did permafrost monitoring, they did things that our communities identified as being important on behalf of our communities, for our communities. And again, it's that assertion of governance over the landscape through that lensing that started from conservation, but is it conservation really? You know what I mean? So the story kept growing from there, and we brought these sorts of discussions and these sorts of stories to the negotiations with Environment Canada over the establishment of Edéhzhíe as a protected area. And so, you know, this picture is from another land-based program that was led by the region, the Łíídlįį Ků trip, where, you know, young adults go out and they have the opportunity to grow their leadership skills. And so we brought to them, you know, where things were at with these negotiations and where they were going. And we told this story to Canada. We said, we want to take care of the land from a Dene perspective. And in order to do that, then our partnership means that we need funding to do that properly. We need funding for Guardians. We need funding for land-based programs that strengthen our language and culture. That these are valuable to our communities, but they're also valuable to others, because as we strengthen ourselves as communities and we share our knowledge and gifts with others, it enables better decision-making by others as well. And so it's not just for us, by us, for us, it's by us, for us, but that benefits all. And so we were successful in that storytelling. And so now the Edéhzhíe protected area has a dedicated Guardians program run by communities engaged in that, where they do land-based programming, where they get communities out on the land to just be Dene, to just do Dene things. But where they're also mapping out project management from a Dene perspective, you know, they're training Guardians to play this role. Because you've got this investment in resources and capacity building really into these communities, the Guardians for these programs are being pulled into other areas. So they're being pulled into things like emergency response. They're being pulled into things like COVID response. They're being pulled into all kinds of things because they become a source of capacity within a community, and a real source of pride. So here they're deploying audio recording units to be part of like a songbird study, because again, that's hitting at concerns around climate change, concerns around biodiversity loss. So the lensing that started from, we want to take our perspective of taking care of the land from a Dene way. What does that mean to us? That means taking care of our laws, using our values and our principles to guide our work, enabling generational knowledge transfer and strengthening our language. Using that as a basis has led to all of this, and has enabled the assertion of nationhood, but has also helped enable government to government relationships, has helped enable to have our communities better understand the land around them, and then share that knowledge with others. So I eventually did leave my roles with the region, and I stepped into a new role with an organization called the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. And in stepping into these roles, the ILI is an organization that is nationally scoped. And so now I have the opportunity to bring forward what I've learned, but also learn how this is growing across the country, how this is not just happening in one region, it's actually happening all over the place by many folks. And so this is just a graphic image that came out, one of the graphic images that came out of a virtual national Guardians gathering that we hosted last June, where we talked about, what's happening all across the country, how are people in different pockets, doing this kind of work, and how can they share their story with each other, inspire each other, share challenges and solutions to those challenges. And so, these are images from Guardians in other parts of the world who are doing the exact same thing, who are using their worldview, their values, their language, their culture to inspire a new way of taking care of the land. And so this is a picture of my daughter, Łíídlįį. I think she's probably like 7 in this picture, from one of our programs. But at the forefront of what's always inspired me in this work has always been, what is the potential of the future? And so, yeah, my kids are pretty big inspirations for me in the work that I do, and just kind of reminding me like why this is all important at the end of the day. So I wanted to mostly inspire a bit of a dialogue, and I know we don't really have a ton of time left, but I'd love to open it up for people's questions or their comments or reflections, or if you have any, Leanne. So.
Yes, for sure. I'll just give people a chance to populate the Q&A text box there that you can find at the bottom of your screen. Well, first of all, thank you. It's such a pleasure to hear of your incredible work. And I have a lot of questions running through my mind. One of the reflections that I have first is that it's really amazing to hear you speak through the various scales that you're working at. I find that as an educator who teaches about governance and our Indigenous governance practices and systems, that I work a lot to support students to sort of see that governance is happening at a individual, interpersonal, familial, community, organization, region, nation to region, and that we have opportunities at all those scales to enact our values. So it's amazing to hear you for you to speak through that, and how you set out initially as a group to find ways to express and enact Dene Laws, values and principles, and that it starts to show up as all these different initiatives and practices. So that's the observation. So must see for that. The other thing that I've been thinking about a little bit more is this use of the word conservation. And I'm just wondering, like you said repeatedly, conservation from a Dene perspective. I'm just wondering what the value of that word is for you and its continued use. Yeah, so maybe you can speak to that first.
Yeah, and maybe quickly, just in response to like your first reflections, it's always struck me in doing this work that it's not often that you get you stumble into a career that enables you to explore who you are as a person, and then that lends itself to your work. But in many ways, that this type of work was so and is so meaningful because the people engaged in it get to really get at who they are, who you are as an individual person, as an Indigenous person. Who am I? And how am I strengthening who I am as an Indigenous person, and then bringing that to bear in the work that I'm doing. And then you kind of grow that from like an individual level up to like a staff level, up to a community level, up to a regional, and it has such a transformative effect in the end. So I just want to kind of acknowledge, that. But the words are very important. Words mean different things to different people. And so that's why, I'm always very careful to say conservation from a Dene perspective, because conservation isn't a Dene value, not the word itself, but the principles behind it are very reflective of Indigenous values. So when I say conservation from a Dene perspective, what I'm kind of getting at is what has been shared or taught with me and with others over the years is, it really means our relationship to the land. And it really means how we strengthen and honor our relationship to the land, but also to each other, because we don't see ourselves as distinct from the land. We don't see ourselves as distinct from other. It's a lot more connected. It's a much more connected way of seeing the world. But conservation has meaning to others. And like I said, partnership is really important in this type of work. And if we want to grow this work in a big way, you need partners. And so sometimes you need to be able to use language that they might recognize and understand, because it's that piece around enabling people to see themselves in the vision of what you're building is very, very, very important. And so I think there's no way around it. You have to use language that might not really get at the full meaning, and then you have to explain your meaning. But you have to use language that people can recognize and connect to in some way. And so that's my thought around the word conservation.
Yeah, merci for that. I've just been thinking about it a bit for my own personal reasons, but that really helps me. I guess what also came to mind was like Indigenous governments, like governments then get sort of qualified in a different kind of way, or then defined in a different kind of way, perhaps. Because if Indigenous governance are rooted or expressions of particular values and principles, then how they come together, how they're organized might be different than what you might expect from like a municipal government, for example. Yeah, so I like that you're using the term almost with an asterisk next to it, saying yes, conservation, and it's qualified by all these other elements. And I think that's empowering. And then also, I think it truly does reflect one of the values that you've stated a number of times too, in this idea of partnership. Yeah, because you certainly don't want to be isolating yourselves, and you aren't in these initiatives. And then we also have the work of like making ourselves legible to non-Indigenous folks or other like funders, industry, as well. So yes, merci for explaining how you use the term. I am really curious about the relationship with industry as well. I'm just wondering, like, how do you maintain a steadfastness in your value sets and principles and the Dene Laws in relationship with industry, with something that holds so much power? Yeah, how do you do that?
Well, I don't know if I have the answer to that, honestly, but I think in my experiences, I think what what becomes empowering is the ability for communities and regions to say, not in my backyard here, but if I'm okay with you doing it here, then if you're going to do it, you can't do it without us, and that we need to play a role. And that role needs to be empowering to ourselves. And I saw that play out with the Enbridge project. Like, for example, permafrost was like a key concern of communities that that wasn't being considered for like as part of the monitoring framework that the industry was going to undertake. And so in having our own program, we could get at that community concern and monitor permafrost and get more information around permafrost. And not just rely on their experts to say, no, don't worry about it, it's good. Actually, we are worried about it, and we want our own people to get out there and investigate what's happening with the permafrost, so that we're being informed, and it can inform our decision making. And so it's definitely tricky, and I think at the end of the day, it's about where, if communities have accepted some activity, what is their role in that activity? And yeah, I'm just noticing
there's a couple of questions there, and we have about 10 minutes left. Do you want to read them, or do you want me to read them out for you?
Maybe I'll read the first one. Thanks a lot for the powerful description of the initiative. Are there shareable resources about the types of monitoring that are being performed by Guardians and how they fit within your framework? I'm a master's student from the U of A, doing my thesis in collaboration with Trondek Quichin,
yep.
And trying to help the implementation of their own monitoring program, trying to gather information about what's being done by other First Nations. So the best source is to go right to nations themselves, to go and ask them. But if you're looking for some resources, the ILI has a Land Needs Guardians campaign webpage. There's also the ILI website that has some information, but coastal, like when I was doing this work and I was trying to grow the program, I went directly to other communities. So I reached out to Łíídlįį Kũ, I reached out to the Coastal First Nations, I reached out to the Innu in Labrador. I reached out to people that I had heard being engaged in the work, and asked if they would consider, working or coming and joining us at a workshop, so that way I could learn from them directly. And those were completely absolutely changed the way that we were approaching things. So there is a toolkit online that you could also look up that Nature United helped put together. So it's called the Guardians Toolkit, and it helps give information about where throughout the country there are different programs. But I hope that's helpful. I don't, do you want to read the next question, or do you want me to keep reading?
You can keep reading. I was actually typing an answer to you as well, because I know of a Yukon one. So
okay.
You keep going.
So this next question, can you provide examples of the types of partnerships you are speaking to? First Nation partnerships, intercommunity partnership, governmental partnership, that were your experiences with partnering with organizations who had different values from the community? So in my experience, all of this work involved all those levels of partnership. So we, when I was with the regional office, and now even with the ILI, all of the work we do is in partnership with communities on the ground, because the work I'm now involved in is all about trying to spotlight that amazing work. So that way we are making the case to federal decision makers, funders, others, on why this makes sense. I've always been in this position of sort of trying to translate between different people. So translating my understanding of these values to others, but even within ourselves, even, at a community to community level, is this what we are agreeing on? Because you need a strong community partnership in the work you're doing in order for it to be successful. So organizations that had different values that like I said, I can't keep honing enough. you need to find the path where people kind of have alignment. And that's in my experiences where you find sort of like the growth in programs. So whether that's an academic partner or that's a government partner, an industry partner, that foundation of that vision that was expressed was, like I said, was broad enough that enabled us to really implement it in a way that made sense. So, I mean, yeah, that Enbridge experience, I mean, industry and, you know, Guardian programs, you wouldn't think they have a shared value, but we were able to find one, and then we were able to come up with the agreement that enabled that partnership to grow for that time period that it was needed. So I feel like I'm not doing a great question. I wish there could be dialogue. Like, I wish I could hear them ask the question and then maybe clarify. But I hope
it's tricky like this.
Yeah. And then this next question from Roberta: the nation I work for has a strong Guardians program, and we partner with other institution governments departments regularly, which helps so much with capacity building and keeps them busy. However, at the same time, being accountable to external institutions, for example, Parks Canada, like for funding, and can create a burden on administration. I'm thinking of an example of when Parks Canada had our Guardians doing so much overtime for a specific short-term project that the days off they banked in return via an internal policy meant that they ran out of time to accomplish other things. I'm not sure what my question is exactly, but we just want our program to be as directed by our own nation as possible, whereas partnerships can sometimes impede on that. And I can fully empathize with that challenge. The reality is the playing field is not level. There's definitely an implicit power dynamic where, you know, our communities are often fighting for resourcing, and then we get resourcing often with strings attached. And so it's not ideal. And I think I can just empathize with the challenge. I know when I was when I was in the position of running the program myself, I was constantly having to assess where I was putting my time and energy, and whether or not it was advancing the needs of our communities or not. And if it was advancing somebody else's agenda, I would try and put a little bit less of my time and energy into it. Not less, but only as much as needed kind of thing, because of that very challenge. And oftentimes I think our communities and our regions don't have proper capacity or resourcing to do the work that's needed. And so I get it. It's hard.
Well, I also hear in that a beautiful example of enacting Dene values, laws, and principles on an individual level. Like that really helps me sort of see moments in my everyday life where I can prioritize or choose to do something with this idea of advancing the community's vision. Yeah, I find that really helpful. So merci for that, which I think we could call your closing comments, unless you wanted to add anything else in the last few minutes that we have.
No, I don't think I have. Maybe I'll just say thank you to Dechinta for inviting me to join into the speaker series and to be able to tell a little bit of the story that's been shared with me over the years by so many amazing people, not just in the Dehcho region, but beyond, but particularly from the Dehcho region. So just to honor their knowledge and their perspectives in the storytelling. So merci.
Yes, and merci for doing that work of translation and using this platform to share with all of us. So best of luck with your future projects, and merci for being here.
Thank you. Merci.
Merci.